This podcast is supported by the Southern Environmental Law Center, one of the nation's most powerful environmental defenders, rooted in the South. Right now, we stand at a crossroads for our environment, and SELC is ready to tackle the challenges ahead, ready to hold the line on environmental protections, ready to ensure people have the clean air, clean water, and healthy climate they deserve, and ready to stand up to powerful interests in the courtroom, the halls of government, and communities across the South. To learn more, visit southernenvironment.org.
This podcast is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Fiscally responsible, financial geniuses, monetary magicians. These are things people say about drivers who switch their car insurance to Progressive and save hundreds. Visit progressive.com to see if you could save. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and affiliates. Potential savings will vary. Not available in all states or situations.
I'm Stephen Metcalf, and this is the Slate Culture Gabfest Wicked and Gladiator II in the Box Office Coliseum edition. It's Wednesday, November 27th, 2024. On today's show, Barbenheimer was the opposite of a one-man standing death match. In fact, it was the ultimate box office win-win, thanks to some weird yin-yang synergy. It was the theatrical release event of the last couple decades, at least. Now comes the simultaneous releases this past weekend of Gladiator II and Wicked. Together they make Glicked, though I have to ask my face-to-face interlocutors, Julia Turner and Dana Stevens, why not Wadiator? It's right there for the taking.
And it sounds like Elmer Fudd is saying it, which is always a plus.
Wadiator.
Does it undermine
I like that a lot better. I also heard somebody suggest Gladicked, which...
That's another winner. That's another winner.
Both are better than Glicked.
But wouldn't it be Gladicked?
That's even betterer.
We're off and running. Anyway, we'll take these in turn. Wicked's the, of course, long-anticipated adaptation of the Broadway musical by Stephen Schwartz and Winnie Holtzman. It gives us the backstory of how the Green Witch, famously played by Margaret Hamilton in the original Wizard of Oz movie, became Wicked. It stars Cynthia Erivo as Elphaba, the not always so wicked nor witchy witch, and Ariana Grande as Galinda, the air quotes good witch. It's directed by Jon M, the director of In the Heights and Crazy Rich Asians, among other movies. Gladiator II, meanwhile, is Ridley Scott's sequel to his 2000 hit, which won the Best Picture Oscar. This one stars Paul Mescal as a prisoner of the Roman Empire, forced to fight for the pleasure of a decadent imperial elite he despises. It's our future, apparently. It co-stars Pedro Pascal and Denzel Washington. And finally, Slate has a wonderful feature. I thought this was just terrific. I delighted in it. It's the 25 most important recipes of the last 100 years. We'll be joined by one of its co-authors, Dan Kois. But first, I am seated face-to-face with Julia Turner.
Here we are.
Here we are.
We still all have bodies.
Speak for yourself.
At least to my eye.
It's very festive being embodied at a table. It's almost like it's Thanksgiving week.
I know. Look at us. We're so against the second Gutenberg revolution here.
We're so authentic. We're so analog.
We haven't been replaced by AI yet.
We're corporeal and bookish people here at a table. And I didn't say that you're a fellow at the USC Annenberg School for Journalism.
But I am.
But you are.
Yes.
And Dana Stevens, of course, is the film critic for Slate. Hey, Dana.
Hey.
I think we should make a show.
Let's do so.
Let's do it. Okay. Wicked is a quadruple dip in the old IP treasury. The movie's based, of course, on the hit Broadway musical, which was based on a best-selling book, which was based on the iconic movie, which was based on the bestsellers by L. Frank Baum. Anyway, some snakes apparently get fatter by eating their own tail. This is one of them. Wicked, the movie, opens accordingly at exactly the moment the Wicked Witch dies, then proceeds to tell the unexpected backstory of how the radiantly green witch, presumed to be born evil, in fact began life as a kind, intelligent, sensitive, generous being, while Glinda, once actually named Galinda, the quote-unquote good witch, was neither good, she's a vapid schemer, nor a witch. She displayed no magic aptitude early on. From there, we get a sprawling and tuneful allegory of a kingdom with something rotten at its core. It stars Cynthia Erivo as Elphaba and Ariana Grande as Galinda. Michelle Yeoh plays a very, one should say, very Hogwarts-like magic pedagogue, and Jeff Goldblum as Oz. It's directed by, as I said, Jon M. Here's a bit from the number Loathing. It's a duet in which the new dorm mates, Elphaba played by Erivo and Galinda played by Grande, complain about their new living situation. Let's listen.
What is this feeling so sudden and new?
I felt the moment I laid eyes on you.
My pulse is rushing.
My head is reeling.
Yeah, well, my face is flushing. What is this feeling, the fervent as a flame? Does it have a name? Yes. Loathing, unadulterated loathing for your face,
Your voice.
your clothing. Let's just say I loathe it all. Every little trick, however small, makes my very flesh begin to crawl. The simple utter loathing.
Dana, I really make an effort not to look at your reviews, even though I love your reviewing, your critical sensibility in your writing when we're talking about a movie, because I want to be surprised. I want it to be a conversation. I glanced at your Wicked review. You really cared for this movie.
Yeah, this movie snuck up on me. I didn't see the play. I'm very curious whether either of you did, but I'm very familiar with the play because my theater nerd daughter saw it twice. You know, the cast album was always being on in the house. She sang some of the songs for her voice teacher. Like a lot of kids of her generation, you know, this really was sort of the Generation Z introduction to musicals, I think, for a lot of young theater kids. She went in with a lot of feelings and thoughts about Wicked, whereas I sort of regarded it as like, oh, that juggernaut with a couple really catchy songs in it. And darned if I didn't get really involved in the story of the green-skinned witch and her prequel travails. And in spite of the fact that I really don't like the fact this is a stealth prequel, it's being marketed as Wicked 1. Oh. I mean, as Wicked, but then you go in and it says Wicked Part 1 on the screen and you realize that this 2-hour and 40-minute movie is only the first half of the musical. Apparently quite expanded because the entire musical on Broadway with intermission, I think, ran less than 3 hours. So, you know, a lot of material has been added for a good reason. According to my daughter, and this is not unusual with smash hit musicals, the book of Wicked, the play, is somewhat thin, right? And it would play very strangely on screen to have all these big power anthems sort of vaguely knit together with a thin story. So we can talk about how it's been expanded and whether that works, but this is an unabashed, gigantic, pleasure-producing machine type movie. You know, you have to go in sort of knowing that. And I feel like by those standards, it's succeeded smashingly. I
love it. So, Julia, not a nihilistic cash grab in the mind of one critic. What about you?
Well, I also had never seen Wicked, the play. I was aware that there was a song called Defying Gravity, and that's about as far as my knowledge went, and basically aware of the fact that John Travolta had mispronounced Idina Menzel's name as Adele Dazeem, and that's like the full extent of my knowledge about Wicked. I was also really charmed by it, in part because this is a movie about friendship, which I just didn't know. I didn't know that's what it was, but this is a movie that passes the Bechdel test with flying colors. It's about like two ambitious women of very different characters and origins who are thrown together and must navigate a relationship with one another that has not that much to do with men. There's a few sprinkled in for fun and eye candy, but their core selves are not defined by that in any way. And I found it really beautiful and somewhat original for being so sincerely about that and for having so many songs that are about that relationship. And I can't think of another musical that centers a friendship in that way. The music itself, I found the songs like transporting while I was in them. And I think the production design of this film, the costumes are extraordinary. The sets are intricate and beautiful, although the whole thing also looks a little bit flat, like a pastel diorama in a way that it worked, but also made me wonder about what the alternate version of it might have been. But the kind of song and dancing is very transporting while you're in it. Certainly the song Defying Gravity stays in your head after you finish, and then after you go to Shake Shack for lunch and then go see Gladiator II and then walk out of that movie, you're still singing Defying Gravity in my experience. But I don't know that I think that musically this is my favorite thing that Broadway's ever produced, but I loved it. And I liked both performances, even though they're so different in style. Cynthia Erivo is obviously amazing in everything, and she's incredible in this. And the way that the show gives you so much of Ariana Grande singing before you get the first big song from Cynthia Erivo sets up just the potency of that voice in a really beautiful way. And then Ariana Grande, who was hilarious on SNL, she is so charismatic and fun. I mean, you had an interesting critique of her performance, Dana, which we should circle back to, but I'm here for the Ariana-sance. Let that girl take over all of Hollywood, whatever she wants to do. I'm here for it.
Well, and the chemistry between those two actresses is so strong, and apparently they did become close friends during filming, or maybe they already were before filming, but they so solidly seem like an actual pair, the pair of frenemies that they play, you know, who have this complex sort of love-hate competitive relationship, that I think Erivo's performance in the end kind of elevates Ariana Grande's. Here's what I'll say about Ariana Grande's, and yeah, I say this in my review as well. I don't think that vocally she quite has the delivery chops for this kind of Broadway song that Cynthia Erivo has in such excess that it sometimes shows up Ariana singing. Not that Ariana is not a technically incredible singer, and she never misses an opportunity to jump up a few octaves in this performance, but the wit of the lyrics, for example, in her big song Popular, which is probably the song's other big, you know, kind of blockbuster hit besides Defying Gravity, it's a very, very witty and lyrically dense kind of song. And in between Ariana's not great enunciation of some of the lyrics and the way John Chu cuts away from her a lot during that number, I just didn't feel like she was quite delivering everything that song has to offer. So it's a technical critique of her performance, but she's great fun to watch.
I hadn't noticed that until I read it in your review, and I thought it was so astute because she's actually so expressive with her body.
Yeah, she's a really good dancer.
She's a good dancer and also a good sort of like physical communicator, and she's obviously an amazing singer. But your point that the nuances of the emotion and wit were not coming through the vocal expression, I thought was interesting.
So I'm the dissenter. I didn't really like the movie. It's not that I didn't very much admire the performances of both leads, which surprised me. Not in the case of Erivo, who's just amazing in the film. I think her performance. It's a very big. Let me back up a little bit. The thing that I had no familiarity with the product, right? And what surprised me about it is, unless I'm mistaken, in the first act that we've seen now at 2 hours and 40 minutes, there isn't a moment where someone is that kind of iconic musical moment where someone is singing kind of to themselves in a melancholy and thoughtful way, right? Think about the way music functions in a musical. This seems to go in one direction, which is the kind of large showstopper in which someone's always singing for someone else, or a large ensemble is singing in order to kind of bring down the house. And I found that somewhat exhausting. But playing against that was the precision of and fineness and subtlety of the facial acting of Erivo, who I just thought she was extraordinary in this film. And I kind of disagree about Ariana Grande. I think she was amazing in it vocally, because I feel like she's really alive to the absurdities of this character and is playing with them vocally all the time. That her sort of show, I think a critic said this, so I think I'm filching it a little bit, but someone pointed out that her little extra show-offy grace notes are knitted well into the character as this other-directed person who has not yet found her own center as a human being. And I thought that really worked. I thought they played off of each other great. What didn't work for me is I found none of the songs memorable except for the two big ones. And secondly, I really cannot quite abide taking this one act of a musical and bloating it out to blockbuster status at 2 hours and 40 minutes. I thought the first hour was exceedingly inert. I just felt myself disengaged. And then finally something like the plot mechanics that I'm sure were characteristic of the original musical kick in. And then I lost myself to it a little bit and started to admire it somewhat. But the cash grab of doubling it in bulk, I don't think is entirely excused by the fact that, you know, it would have appeared slight if you had just transposed it. If you can't tell that story in 2 hours and 40 minutes, I don't know what's wrong with you. So its lack of economy and its kind of over-egged quality started to really get to me. In the end, I was very on the fence. I didn't love it.
One thing that apparently is new in it is an expansion of this plot about what is happening politically in Oz, which if you've read all the Frank Baum books, the world of Oz goes in many different directions, and it's not actually too far from the original material to get into all kinds of weird hypotheses about how Oz is run and why and for whom and whatever. But I guess this set of concerns is sort of more lightly in the musical and more extensively in the movie. And I didn't hate it. I didn't hate the plight of the talking animals. No spoilers. Some spoilers. In part because some of the animals are charming, and in part because I think it worked for me in adding some stakes to all of the drama of the songs. And like, why do we care if she meets the wizard? Exactly. It's like kind of helps for there to be something she cares about besides the general sense that everybody's genuflecting before this guy.
Yeah, fair enough. And it should be said that the original books and the iconic 39 movie are parables about the gold standard, right? Follow the Olympic Road, the Tin Man. There's, Baum, as I understand it, was very politically engaged and intended them as political allegories. So I don't object to that. But the original runtime of The Wizard of Oz, I mean, one of the goldenest products of golden age Hollywood, was an hour and 40 minutes. The art of drawing in an audience very quickly and economically into a story that they find utterly captivating, holding them hostage to that captivation for a period of roughly 90 minutes, requires a level of craft and care and attention to Aristotelian unities and, continuities of character. And that contract is broken when you bloat things out and you're like, we're gonna immerse you in a world like it's a ride. It's more like a theme ride, and you're gonna love being in the theme ride. So, such niceties as plot, character development, and, urgency of the moral gets kind of squandered along the way. And I thought it was there. I thought they could have done it, but
I mean, I'm not going to say this isn't equal to the 1939 Wizard of Oz by any means. And from what I gather, the novel Wicked by Gregory Maguire that the musical was based on is essentially fan fiction, right? I mean, it's apparently really, really well done fan fiction. And I think that kind of comes through in the movie. Like the world building of imagining Oz before Dorothy is actually pretty solid.
No, it's a brilliant conceit.
And there's lots of touches that we haven't gotten into, the talking animals and some sort of foreshadowing of who might be the future Scarecrow, the future Tin Man, the future Lion. That, I don't know. I mean, as somebody who would certainly put the original in one of my top 10 movies of all time.
One of the greatest movies of all time.
I went into this really just wanting to have a sort of fun fanfic exploration of that world, and I think it succeeded on that level.
And by the way, I don't mean that it should live up to that standard. For it to do that, it'd have to be one of the 7 best movies of all time, which is preposterous. What I mean is that let's recall that in the golden age of filmmaking, the art was to tell a story in 90 minutes, maybe 100 or 101, and not like bloat. It was a terrible excuse to dispose of craft.
I hear Steve's doom and gloom, and it is long, but like, I would say if you're on the fence, go. Like, it's pretty fun. I will also say I brought my 2 sons, neither of whom has seen The Wizard of Oz, although now we will. Sorry.
Oh, dear God.
Child Protective Services
Exactly,
will be at your door tomorrow.
911.
Is there like a cultural version of Child Protective Services?
I'll get you, my pretty, and your little dog, too.
After a night with drinks, it's tough to bounce back the next day. But with ZBiotics, there's a surefire way to wake up feeling fresh after a night of drinking. ZBiotics pre-alcohol probiotic drink is the world's first genetically engineered probiotic. It was invented by PhD scientists to tackle rough mornings after drinking. Here's how it works. When you drink, alcohol gets converted into a toxic byproduct in the gut. It's this byproduct, not dehydration, that's to blame for your rough next day. Pre-alcohol produces an enzyme to break this byproduct down. Just remember to make ZBiotics your first drink of the night, drink responsibly, and you'll feel your best tomorrow. Also, ZBiotics is continuing to invent probiotics that will help with everyday challenges of modern living. Go to zbiotics.com/culture to learn more and get 15% off your first order when you use culture at checkout. ZBiotics is backed with 100% money-back guarantee, so if you're unsatisfied for any reason, they'll refund your money, no questions asked. Remember to head to zbiotics.com/culture and use the code CULTURE at checkout for 15% off.
It's always fun to dive into the latest rumors, like who's dating who will be on the next season of our favorite show. Well, here's one rumor to squash the idea that Discover isn't widely accepted. The truth is, Discover is accepted at 99% of places that take credit cards nationwide. That means it's accepted basically anywhere across the country. Don't pay attention to every rumor out there. But remember, it does pay to discover. Based on the February 2024 Nielsen report, learn more at discover.com/credit card. All right, well, Gladiator, the 2000 original film starring Russell Crowe, to my mind, it was such a peculiar phenomenon. It was a machismo gore fest with a tincture of soul, and something about that unexpected combination sent it to box office and critical heights. I can't say I loved that movie, but anyway, it did win Best Picture. Now comes its belated sequel 24 years later. It's also directed by Ridley Scott. In this one, Paul Mescal plays Lucius, a resident of a North African kingdom under assault by the Imperial Romans when the movie begins. After being conquered, he's taken to Rome as a prisoner of war, thrown into the Colosseum. That much we expect from this movie from the opening frame, but what's hinted at increasingly, and I won't give anything away, is that this rebel from the far provinces may in fact be a secret bearer of some kind of important bloodline. The movie also stars Denzel Washington as the ever lubricious Macrinus, a brilliant intriguer using Lucius to his own ends, and Pedro Pascal as a great and badly abused Roman general. We couldn't get a clip with Paul Mescal, but this one features Pedro Pascal as General Acacius. It gives us a sense of the film's quite grandiose vibes. Here, the twin emperors, two people rule Rome right now, Geta and Caracalla, played by Joseph Quinn and Fred Heichinger, are congratulating Acacius for a victory.
You are too modest, Acacius. It does not suit a general as accomplished as yourself.
The glory is yours, not mine. I only ask for some respite from war, to spend time with my wife.
Your wife, yes. Remember the privileges we have granted her? Where is she now to ignore such an occasion?
There are victories yet still to come. Persia. India. Both must be conquered.
Rome has so many subjects. She must feed them.
They can eat war.
They can eat war. Julia, typically, obviously, I start with Dana, the film critic, but we're doing two films this week. Let me start with you. Did you have any powerful associations or feelings about the original? And what do you make of this as a extension of the brand?
Steve, this is a bad movie. It's my conclusion.
Did you see the original?
Never saw it.
Julia, you and your blind spots.
I'm dying to hear what you make of this, Steve, as the nation's foremost critic of what Hollywood movies say about the state of American masculinity. But my take on it is that it is like a perfect portrait of how confused and fucked American masculinity is.
But does it know it's that perfect portrait? Or is that
no, it is not.
It
does not have the beautiful intentionality of Magic Mike to do that. It is befuddled in all kinds of sort of fascinating ways. Okay, things I liked. Great spectacle, pretty fun battles in the Colosseum. In general, the battles are well choreographed. Things I generally like in movies, Pedro Pascal and Paul Mescal, whose names are weirdly similar, I realized.
I know.
Two Scal boys.
The Scalawags. And I want to come back around to whether we think Mescal was well cast and well served in this role. It's a strange performance and a strange role. But just as a political perspective, so Rome is ruled by these mad, sort of pale, syphilitic emperors that are doing like Joffrey from Game of Thrones drag. There's this sense that we want to return to Republican Rome, and that the emperor Rome is corrupt and cruel and the colonization is bad and et cetera, et cetera. But how are we going to get back to Republican rule? We got to go to the bloodline of the guy who believed in the Republic. It's like the descendant of the Republican is the person who can restore the Republic, which is like the opposite of the fucking idea of a republic. And so the whole thing is muddled. And then we have these men, including Pascal, in their breastplates, staring into the middle distance and saying strength and honor. But like, what does honor mean in this movie? It just means wailing on people and then like eventually deciding that you should live up to your bloodline destiny and go for a republic, I guess. I don't know. So all of that was a mess. And then Mescal, it's interesting to cast Mescal in this because he is kind of like a soulful boyo and not a macho boyo in his general preceding roles. And I like the idea of the soulful boyo and not the macho boyo in this role, but then it doesn't work at all, I don't think. I don't know. What do you guys think?
Yeah, and to me, that's more of a script problem. I mean, I would say that both, and I think I do say this in my review, both Mescal and Pascal are disserviced and miscast and don't have anything to do except be, like you said, vaguely noble. But what are they even noble about? Like biting the necks of baboons in the Coliseum?
I just like cackled out loud in my theater when Mescal bit the neck of the baboon, or forearm, I think. But anyway, that happens in this movie. And like, I think you're supposed to be like, "Whoa!" But I was just like laughing. And then I got these kind of like glares from the movie around me.
In that moment, I really wanted them to sprout wings and then for, Glinda, to descend and
float in on the bubble.
Save the day. Like, let's do a mashup.
Justin Chang makes that great point in his double review of Gladiator and Wicked, where he says, yeah, they both feature very angry monkeys. But it is true that ideological muddling is so profound, like it's so foundational to the movie's moral universe that it's hard to get to a place where you would even know how to align yourself. I mean, like this bloodline obsession we've been talking about extends to the relationship between Gladiator II and its ancestor Gladiator I, which if you have seen it recently, I rewatched it before going to see this. And it's like the story beats are almost identical for the first hour of the movie, right? And there's also all these explicit moments of kind of, I guess you'd call it fan service, like let's go visit the shrine to Russell Crowe that exists in this Roman cave with his sword and his breastplate. And there's just really a sense that the first movie is this kind of ancestor to be worshipped that in itself is anti-Republican, as Julia says, but also just kind of unpleasant.
Weirdly fetishy. I want to say here, I totally agree that both Mescal and Pascal are grossly miscast, and they both seem almost openly befuddled. Pascal more so. I feel like he I know that he didn't phone it in. It's too big a movie, and there are other actors really not phoning it in, which we'll get to. So I doubt he would do that just as a professional.
Oh, he bulked up hugely and learned to fight.
No doubt. Yeah, no doubt. But he just looks like he's in an SNL skit. I keep waiting for him to break character and start giggling. It just doesn't work at all. Mescal, what I will say is Mescal, and I'm filching from another critic who I wish I could name because it was a very astute observation, tends to act in very woman-centric plots or projects. He is brilliant at projecting inwardness outward. He did it so beautifully in that heartbreaking movie After Sun. It's his specialty, and it just doesn't work in the context of this film at all. The ambivalence doesn't read right in a gladiatorial movie. It's not because he himself is puzzling out the conflicts between republicanism and cults of personality, right? It's like just part of the general muddle of the movie.
Right. And that comes back to Dana's point that it's the script, I think, because this could be a really interesting movie if all of that interiority were used to be about something. But he isn't actually brooding over anything specific other than like, I'm so mad.
Well, what's funny, too, is we've recently seen this kind of movie done, I would say, almost flawlessly. The Dune picture, especially the second one, are all about the ambivalences of power, cults of personality, and politics. What I would say about this movie is that having recently become obsessed with Robert Graves's I, Claudius books, of course, there's Mary Beard, there's the TV show I, Claudius, there's the Gibbon, like Roman intriguing is so fascinating. And the very best part of this movie to me is the relationship between Denzel Washington, who is, I think, wonderfully weird in this movie. He just completely characterizes the decadence, sort of, the irony of the Roman Empire, right, is that you have completely, this is like Graves drives this home in I, Claudius. These are pagans. They do not place an intrinsic value on human life. The disposability of the slaves when it comes to just pure spectacle for the elites can't be exaggerated, right? The number that they're willing to just slaughter in order to be amused. So there's this just massive discrepancy between how effete, super refined, cultured, just sort of ethereal that this upper class has become. Their feet have not touched mortal seeming ground in forever, and the utter violence and gore required to sustain that world. And that there's an element of that in this movie. Some of the intriguing by Denzel Washington, who portrays this sort of weird palace scheming world, I thought quite well. And the Senator Thrakes, I think is his name, this guy that he's gambling with, and he kind of. I thought
we can tell he's evil because he's wearing blush. All the bad men wear blush in this movie.
I know that the way they effeminize evil is just
there's the same
gross.
kind of queer-coded villainry in the first one.
Anyway, I thought all of that kind of worked, but the rest of it was garbage.
I mean, it's never not fun to watch Denzel Washington chew a gigantic ham bone.
Mm-hmm.
It was so over the top that
the
whole thing felt like a rotor was out of whack. I don't know. I mean,
when it leans into camp, though, this movie may at least be at its most audience-pleasing. I mean, I don't think it even strikes that tone perfectly, but I think Denzel's performance is in line with, the biting baboons and the sharks, which we haven't mentioned, the entire naval battle station, the Colosseum, complete with sharks, which actually, in researching my review, led me to the shocking revelation that they did actually flood the Colosseum for naval battles, not with sharks that we know of. But I'm kind of my mind stopped at the idea of, what was the drainage system? Man, those Romans, they had it
Paging
down.
Mary Beard.
They could engineer a Colosseum.
No, I hear you. But even then, it's how empty-headed this movie is. So we learn briefly that Denzel Washington's character was enslaved and then rises to this position of being the slave master and then is trying to sort of machine everyone around him in order to acquire power. And then it's all right, well, so why isn't the movie about him then? Yeah. Why is he Mr. Side Character? The performance is so broad and goofy that you don't actually get to the why of that. How do you become a person who goes through that experience and then becomes that power hungry? There's so much fun theatrics on top, but I sort of felt like that character was missing a soul.
And it could be so rich because he's supposed to be a formerly enslaved person who's become a slave trader, right?
Right. So just the interiority of all of these people is thin. And then it just takes for frickin' ever to get to its resolution.
Yeah, this is another 2 hours and 40 minutes that should have been, 110.
Well, and just can we come back to the question of honor for just one quick minute? A movie about a corrupt empire possibly on the brink of falling because of its inhumanity and illogic, potentially a resonant film for America to see right now, right? But this movie does not quite have an idea of what honor is, and to the degree that it does, it's just violence. It's sort of like bravery. It seems to confuse physical might and bravery with honor. And that seems actually not just dim, but kind of pernicious at this moment in our culture, where it's interesting to think through what honor might be or what norms or ethics or high values and virtues we might hope that our culture will figure out ways to uphold, but it's not biting off a monkey's forearm.
Gladiators like a stallion must be pampered, taught to use your heads. Good body with a dull brain is as cheap as life itself.
Since 1981, Justin has been producing world-class Bordeaux-style wines from Paso Robles on California's Central Coast. As the pioneer of Paso, Justin wines are what put Paso Robles on the winemaking map. With a rich history of accolades, Justin produces exceptional wines and is proud to be America's #1 luxury Cabernet. Justin's flagship Bordeaux is called Isosceles. They sent me a bottle of that to try a couple months ago, and I absolutely loved it. I've found it in stores around my area and had it more since then. May have it some more times during the holidays. You can also find it, if you can't find it at a store near you, at justinwine.com. So visit justinwine.com and enter Gabfest20 for 20% off your order. Justin offers the perfect holiday gifts for clients, colleagues, friends, or family. Be sure to check them out at justinwine.com to receive 20% off your order for a limited time.
Audible's best of 2024 picks are here. Discover the year's top audiobooks, podcasts, and originals in all your favorite genres. From memoirs and sci-fi to mysteries and thrillers, from romance and well-being to fiction, Audible's carefully curated list in every category is the best way to hear 2024's best of the year in audio entertainment, like the star-studded production of George Orwell's 1984, which both honors and reinvigorates the terrifying classic. It's one of the best original dramatizations out there. Or romance that hits the spot like Emily Henry's Funny Story, heartfelt memoirs like Supreme Court Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson's Lovely One. Listen to the year's best fiction like The Women by Kristen Hanna and Percival Everett's brilliantly subversive James. Audible. There's more to imagine when you listen. Go to audible.com/culture and discover all the year's best waiting for you.
I just want to inform our listeners up front that due to a series of technical glitches, Julia is going to have slightly altered audio for the following segment. Slate has run a wonderful feature called The 25 Most Important Recipes of the Past 100 Years, pegged presumably to Thanksgiving, the eating holiday. Let me quote some very lovely introductory prose from the piece itself. Recipes carry not only ingredients and instructions, but also family stories, regional lore, cultural values, evolutions in technology and free time, and of course, taste. They track the movement of diverse peoples across borders and nutrition fads through bodies. They are both tool and knowledge, artless instruction manual, and literary form. We're joined now by Dan Kois, the co-author of this really lovely idea and beautifully executed. Dan, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Let me properly introduce you as writer, editor, and podcaster deluxe of Slate, and also the author of Hampton Heights, the novel. And I note the PR copy says the book is funny, thrilling, filthy, and sneakily beautiful, which is coincidentally how I think of you.
That we are as one. Yes.
Talk us through the genesis of this and execution of it. I should say, just to give people, as it were, a taste, like the origins of it's like wonderful origin stories of like Caesar salads and Toll House cookies, in addition to many other delights. Where did the idea come from? And talk to me about how fun it was to execute it.
I wrote this project with Bryan Lowder, a great longtime Slate writer and editor. And he and I were talking about recipes as a form, as that introduction sort of suggests. Recipes as a form are just a really unusual literary product, and they play a really interesting role in my aesthetic and cooking and thinking life. And I've spent an enormous amount of time staring at them and interpreting them, probably as much time as I've spent interpreting any particular kind of text. And it dawned on both of us that there was a way to sort of give this form a nod, to give this form its flowers, but also to think about how home cooking has changed in America. We've gone through a lot of sort of weird eras in American cooking in the last 100 years, from the super convenience era of the 50s, in which high-tech ingredients were being put out into the world by companies who would then create recipes to use those ingredients to help the busy housewife save time, to the domestic goddess universe of the 90s, when all of a sudden the Ina Gartens and Martha Stewarts were telling us how to become hosts supreme, to the science revolution of the aughts and the tens, when America's Test Kitchen and other sort of food hack specialists were walking us through the idea that there could be one perfect recipe to make each kind of food. And as a cook, I've gone through sort of each of those steps as well. And you guys may have had a similar experience that, you sort of graduate to different kinds of recipes as your cooking becomes more confident and as you get interested in other ideas. So the idea of the piece was, let's find 25 recipes that really represent how Americans cook and the ways that how Americans cook have changed over the last 100 years.
Dan, I noticed that you move chronologically through the last century, right? Surprisingly for me anyway, the oldest recipe that you cite, the 1924 recipe, is for Caesar salad, which seems to me like it would be, somehow that seems like a later in the 20th century kind of invention. The chronology was one of my favorite things about this. I kept being surprised either by how late or how early the date of the introductions of certain things were.
Caesar salad both seems like it was invented in 1991 and like it was invented 7,000 years ago.
Right.
Yeah,
by
exactly.
actual Caesar.
Exactly.
Right. But I'm wondering how you thought about historical epics in that way. I mean, you just mentioned a little bit, the convenience cooking of the 50s. Also, you talk about the cocktail revolution, and I love that one of your recipes is a whole book, a book of cocktail recipes from 1951 that was part of the cocktail revival, even though it also sounds like when it was published, cocktails were at a very low ebb in the early 50s. Anyway, if you have any stories about the selection process in terms of chronology, I would be interested to know.
It really was amazing to learn some of the backstories of these recipes, because, this is not like other projects I've done at Slate where I went into it being like, oh, I already basically know what's going to be on this list, or I have my opinions. This really was, I think, for both Bryan and I, a real excavation project and a learning experience. I did not know the Caesar salad was invented in 1924. To take another example of a thing that doesn't even make the primary list, but is just a supplement, I didn't know nachos were invented in 1928. I found all of these stories, many of which are about individuals innovating in some way and then being somewhat surprised to find that innovation becoming widely, almost virally popular in an era before virality was like a thing. I found a lot of them very inspiring, like the idea that this guy, Caesar Cardini, would, be running a restaurant in Tijuana to avoid prohibition and throw a bunch of ingredients together in the kitchen to make a Caesar salad because that's what he had and serve it to his guests. And within 10 years, he was bottling Caesar salad dressing, and, the French were calling it the greatest American recipe of all time. And finding these moments of serendipity in one person's kitchen that we now, as cooks, 100 or 70 or 50 years later, can reenact and iterate upon and improve or pervert or wreck. I found that very inspiring and totally enjoyable. And then seeing a recipe like, to talk about something from a later era, seeing a recipe like the Zuni roast chicken, the Zuni Cafe roast chicken by Judy Rogers, which is from the early 2000s. Her recipe opened in the late 90s and is sort of a sort of second wave California cuisine masterpiece, this roast chicken. And to see a recipe like that crystallizes sort of everything I understand about contemporary cooking, the way it combines scientific-ish food hacks and a commitment to super quality ingredients, but at a level that cooks everywhere in America can replicate. You don't have to be in Berkeley in the middle of summer to get the stuff you need to get to make this chicken, and a commitment to putting it all together in a package that's designed to deliver maximum flavor and pleasure at once. And then to make that and be like, oh, it works. The recipe absolutely works every single time you make it. It was wonderful to see this combination of innovation and inspiration and then really good writing that leads a chef to a totally satisfying, happy result.
I just love this package. I thought you guys did an amazing job putting it together. I loved a couple things about it. One, it was very clever how you sort of have your 25 recipes, but then you have kind of bonuses or pairings with each one or with most of them. Sometimes it's a comment, but you point out that actually nachos and Caesar salad weirdly have sort of a similar origin story, which is not something I knew or would have thought of. I just thought that you guys had a very elegant way with those pairings and grace notes, and it seems like a way to be inclusive and to try not to leave out any major important trends. I want to know, what was the thing that didn't make it on there that was the hardest one? Like what just barely got to the cutting room floor?
Our last cut was shrimp and grits, which has an incredible and fascinating backstory in that it's primarily the food of enslaved people in Charleston that then became the food of the black cooks of white families in Charleston throughout the 1800s. It was first published in a cookbook in the 1940s. It was a cookbook ostensibly written by a white Charlestonian, but in it she credits her black cook with almost every recipe in the book. And then in the 80s, it was sort of re-revolutionized by a restaurant in Chapel Hill, my beloved Chapel Hill, called Crook's Corner. And the chef there made a sort of fancified, fussified version of shrimp and grits that Craig Claiborne of the New York Times fell in love with, published, and made shrimp and grits into like the brunch thing that you make if you are trying to make a Southern brunch. Now, if you are making Southern brunch, you make shrimp and grits, but you don't make Old Charleston shrimp and grits, which is really good shrimp, really good grits, and butter. You make fancy, fussy shrimp and grits, which is mushrooms and bacon and scallions and a little bit of peanut oil and some hot sauce and some other stuff. And it does a great job of masking that you got your shrimp at the grocery store and they don't taste very good, but it bears actually very little resemblance to the dish as it once existed.
Dan, did we bury the lead here? Didn't you make most or all of these?
I made all and more. Like I made those shrimp and grits when I thought they were still going to be on the list.
I want to hear all about it. How did this go? Talk us through. What were the highlights and what were the lowlights?
We should stipulate that it's a separate companion piece. So there's the 25 best recipes, and then there's a crazy stunt journalism project, which is particularly crazy to undertake while you're also editing the best recipes of cooking all 25 within 1 month, which only Dan is the only journalist in America demented enough to do, and wrote about with great hilarity.
That was a classic example of accidentally saying something in a meeting that then you had to do. But yeah, I spent all of October cooking every recipe on the list, plus a bunch of other ones that turned out that didn't make the list, and feeding them to my family because I wanted to have that experience of following these recipes. I thought that would make it easier and more interesting to write about them. But I also thought it would be fun and funny to like sort of explore 100 years of American cooking and American thinking about cooking in my own kitchen, especially because I think I'm like a pretty good cook, but I'm a kind of a bad recipe follower. I have that habit that a lot of people in the New York Times cooking comments have of being like, oh, this recipe seems pretty good, but I bet if I trade this for this and replace this with that and take all the butter out and instead put in coconut oil or whatever, it'll probably be better. I do that all the time. And so I fuck up recipes all the time. So my experience over the month of October was a sort of a series of triumphs when I did successfully follow a recipe because it was really well written and because I managed to focus and successfully do it. And then enormous disasters, as when I tried to make Jim Leahy's No Knead bread, the recipe that made it possible, supposedly, for the amateur home baker on his or her first try to turn out a beautiful crusty loaf of bread. And the thing I had after like 18 hours of rising and not kneading, but folding and setting and yeasting was this like flat piece of shit that looked like a bialy and tasted like rocks.
It's such a funny piece. Everyone should read it. I need to make a confession to our listeners and an apology to Dan. Close readers of this package will see that my name is one of the many thanked, the least culinarily luminary of those thanked at the very end of the piece, because Dan asked me to submit recipes. I immediately wrote back with a recommendation and then totally failed for weeks to follow through with any additional thoughts. But having read your list, I still think it was a good recommendation because I think it was hard to understand before seeing what you guys came up with, how you were going to define importance. Like, I didn't know how I would have defined importance.
Part of the problem was that we didn't know either when we were sending out those first emails. We also were trying to figure it out.
Right. So the recipe that I intended to recommend was the Marion Burroughs plum torte that appeared in the New York Times. And it probably would not have, it appeared, I think, in the late 80s for the first time and then was republished every year for like 12 years until they finally declared they were retiring it, and now they still publish it sometimes in August when it's plum season in the Northeast. But I now realize what I should have said, which is that maybe you could make the argument that it was one of the first New York Times viral recipes that began as an augur of how the New York Times would come to dominate cooking and recipe generation in America. So that's my belated apology to Dan for what I should have submitted had I ever finished my half thought.
I think that's not wrong. And a lot of what this project ended up tracking was not only the way we cooked, but the way we found food, the way we found the things to cook. And so, every recipe from the 50s comes on an ingredient package. It comes on the back of the Toll House Cookies package, or it comes on a packet of Lipton soup mix, or your Campbell's cream of mushroom soup. And then in the 80s, and 90s, they come from cookbooks from beloved restaurants or, domestic goddesses. And then in the aughts and the tens, they come from two places. They either come from social media, right? From something getting big on Instagram or now on TikTok, or they come from the New York Times. And you're right that the boom in the New York Times being the cooking authority is something worth tracking and something that becomes a kind of tangential story that you can understand in looking at our list without us ever highlighting it. And I think you can make an argument that plum torte, which, as you say, was republished for decades by the Times by popular demand, by people literally writing in letters to the Times and saying, I lost my plum torte recipe, please republish it, was the first sort of sign along with Craig Claiborne's sort of dominance of cooking media and discussion in the 70s and 80s, of the way that the Times would come to be the place we find what we're going to cook next. However, also, Julia, you were the only person who suggested that plum torte. 3 people suggested recipes for other plum desserts that began with some version of the line, "Forget the New York Times plum torte."
Dan, this was really, really fun segment based on an incredibly fun package. It's the 25 most important recipes of the last 100 years. We'll link to it. Well done. Kudos. And thanks for coming back on the show.
Thanks, everyone. Bon appetit!
Tomorrow's Thanksgiving.
Turkey and dressing and pie and cake.
And fruit salad and whipped cream and cranberries. Gee.
Hello, ladies and gentlefolk, boys and girls. The Grinch is back again to ruin your Christmas season with 'Tis the Grinch holiday podcast. After last year, he's learned a thing or two about hosting, and he's ready to rant against Christmas cheer and roast his celebrity guests like chestnuts on an open fire. You can listen with the whole family as guest stars like Jon M, Brittany Broski, and Danny DeVito try to persuade the mean old Grinch that there's a lot to love about the insufferable holiday season. But that's not all. Somebody stole all the children of Whoville's letters to Santa, and everyone thinks the Grinch is responsible. Can Cindy Lou and Max help clear the Grinch's name? Grab your hot cocoa and cozy slippers to find out. Follow 'Tis the Grinch holiday podcast on the Wondery app or wherever you get your podcasts. Unlock weekly Christmas mystery bonus content and listen to every episode ad-free by joining Wondery Plus in the Wondery app on Spotify or on Apple Podcasts.
All right, before we go any further, this is typically where we discuss business in our show. Dana, what do we have?
Yes, we have a couple items in our biz this week. The first is to remind you that our annual tradition, year-end tradition of a call-in show where we take questions from listeners about whatever in the world you want to ask us about is coming up pretty soon now at the end of the year, and you can still call in your question. You can leave us a voicemail at 260-337-8260. And just let us know something you'd like us to talk about. Answer a riddle, a puzzle, something that isn't even related to culture, or that's something that you always wanted to talk about on the show and we never have. We will put them all in a big list and pick a few to answer on that upcoming episode.
And we should also say, if you want, you can just record a voice memo and email it to us at culturefest@slate.com if you've forgotten how to use telephones and the voice memo is your native format. We will also accept voice memos or just written questions.
That seems like a unique form of trauma. Like, phone calls traumatize me, but doing this identical thing also on my phone doesn't.
Look, I don't understand voice memos because they're just voicemail that's somehow become cool. Like, I have some voice memo friends. I'm not a voice memo person. I think we're all a little bit older than the voice memo generation. But for whatever reason, people be leaving voice memos.
I have to say I love when my daughter leaves me a voice memo. They're works of art. I've kept some of her voice memos for years on end because they're so fun. But yeah, making them always feels a little
I'm just like, this is like TiVo for voicemail. I don't want it. Just a voicemail that is texted to me is still a voicemail. But nonetheless, we would love your voicemails or your voice memos. And please, like, the goofier, the better. These do not need to be sober, although they can. But we would also take wild card questions.
Yeah, it can be floss or water pick. What's your preference? All right. Once again, that number is 260-337-8260. So please send us your questions. I think we're a little low on questions right now, right? We're trying to build up some before our call-in at the end of this year. So give us a call there. Our other piece of business this week is just to tell you about our Slate Plus segment. This week, we're going to talk about Blue Sky, a topic that's particularly germane because that relatively new social media network just had a huge explosion of signups in the past couple of weeks since the U.S. election. I've been on Blue Sky for a little over a year, and I'm very pro. We have thoughts about that site and about the future of social media in the billionaires own everything age. If you're a Slate Plus member, you will hear that segment as a separate episode in your feed. If you're not, you can always become one by going to slate.com/cultureplus and signing up. When you're a member, what do you get? Access to all the writing and all the podcasting on slate.com, never hitting a paywall, and helping to support us, our show, and the work of our colleagues. These memberships really matter to Slate, so please, if you can, sign up today at slate.com/cultureplus. Or you can subscribe on Apple Podcasts by clicking Try Free at the top of our show page.
All right, now is the moment in our podcast when we endorse Dana.
You know, in line with our discussion with Dan Coyce about the piece he co-authored on the 100 greatest recipes or most important recipes of the last century, I am going to endorse a recipe, especially because this show is dropping the day before Thanksgiving. So if you find yourself needing another appetizer that's very easy to throw together and is a sort of historic, I think, beloved recipe, there's Lori Colwin's creamed spinach with jalapeno peppers. Do either of you know this dish?
No, but that sounds so good.
Do you know who Lori Colwin is? So she was a fiction writer and food writer. Her big era of success was in the 90s. She died quite young, and she's a really beloved figure in this sort of, auto fiction recipe world, not unlike Nora Ephron, whose book Heartburn was full of great recipes that people still cook and share. Lori Colwin wrote about this really comforting and very, very simple to make dip. You can have it as a dip, or you can sort of have it spread on bread or whatever, that uses frozen spinach. You have to use frozen spinach because it would take about 3 wheelbarrows of fresh spinach to make the amount that you need. So a box of frozen spinach, some pickled jalapenos, or you can use fresh jalapeno if you have one, and then just basic things you're sure to have around the house pretty much. Cheese, flour, breadcrumbs. You put them all together and it makes this ambrosially spicy, delicious, creamy dip that makes everyone happy. It's an extreme comfort food.
You, Dana Stevens, are an ambrosially spicy dip. I gotta say, we finally have found your perfect.
Oh, I'm honored to be associated with this dish. We'll put a link on our show page. But yeah, I plan to make a double recipe of this tomorrow because it's something your guests can eat while they stand around while you're sort of finishing up cooking. It smells really good. It looks really pretty. You can dip tortilla chips in it or whatever you like. And it seriously could not be easier to make. It's almost at the level of dump some cream of mushroom soup into some noodles. But it comes out more refined tasting than that, I promise. So Lori Colwin's creamed spinach with jalapeno peppers.
I love
Yumbo.
Julia, what about you?
Okay, I'm recommending a piece of technology. There is an app called Opal that you can download. And essentially what it is a app blocker for your phone. And what I like about it is that it's really, really well designed. So you can create windows of time when you don't want to be able to look at whatever, social media or this or that app. And then if you try to look at those apps during that time, it shows you a beautiful image of nature and makes you breathe for 7 seconds before you can then continue to override your block if you want. And I think you can also, I haven't even played with all the features yet. I think you can also set it to make blocks that are non-overridable. And I've been using it for a few weeks. I have cut down my daily screen time by an hour and a half. And it does cost money. And I have not done the research. I did not do a price checking research to figure out what is the price optimized, cheapest, best way to do this. I saw some newsletter writer recommend it and was sure, I'll give that a whirl. And I did the free trial and it was sign up for your annual, whatever it is. And I did. So there's not a Wirecutter recommendation where I have found the very best one. I just happened to try one on a whim, but it's very, very thoughtfully designed. It puts just enough hoops in the way that it gives you a couple bumps of you sure? You sure? You really need to look at Instagram stories right now? And then if you're no, I do. I need to take a break. I want to waste my brain for a little bit. You can get there, but it's just a really beautiful piece of design. So the app is called Opal.
I like that. Take a beat. Yeah. All right. So I'm going to do just a weird little food endorsement, but it's just kind of throwing it out there to see a reaction, which is I had a whitefish recipe that one sheet that the Times 6,000 5-star reviews of where you have cherry tomatoes with a cod or a halibut.
Oh.
But my beloved, it's a great recipe, by the way. This is not my endorsement. But the fish store, wonderful neighborhood fish store, had no cod nor halibut. So they downsold me on pollock.
Oh.
Have you ever baked a pollock?
Don't think so.
That's the fish and fish sticks for the most part.
Shit,
very
it
basic.
Flakes up so
Nice.
beautifully. And I felt like it wasn't a high maintenance fish, right? Where if you just miss the window with cod or halibut, sometimes you're eating a little bit rubbery or eating a little bit raw. And this one, unless I just got supremely lucky, came out beautifully. So highly recommended. I love that recipe. But my real endorsement is I am a big and budding fan of the writer Sam Huber. They are an editor at the Yale Review and a frequent contributor now to the New York Review of Books. And the recent piece is called The Loudest, Brightest Thing about the DJ Sophie. And I love it when a young explains to me a geese their preoccupations in language that I find quite persuasive and moving. And Huber is a wonderful writer. Their piece on Lucinda Williams in the New York Review of Books has one of those moments where you just slap your forehead that you hadn't written that sentence. And I love Lucinda Williams. But the opening sentence is, again and again in the music of Lucinda Williams, the sins of the father are visited upon the son's girlfriend. And you're like, you have me forever. You could write 7 mediocre pieces and I'd be like that great writer, Sam Huber. Anyway, I'm glad you appreciate it. So highly recommended. We'll link to the Lucinda Williams and the Sophie piece. And of course, this one-sheet fish recipe. Guys, how fun is it doing a show all in the same meat space?
It's the best.
It's really nice. It's really fun. Thank you so much. Thank you, Julia.
Thank you, Steve.
Thank you, Dana.
Thanks, Steve.
You will find links to some of the things we talked about today at our show page. That's slate.com/culturefest, and you can email us at culturefest@slate.com. Our introductory theme music is by the composer Nicholas Britell. Our producer is Jared Downing. Our production assistant is Kat Hong. For Dana Stevens and Julia Turner, I'm Stephen Metcalf. Thank you so much for joining us. We will see you soon.
Helping the little lady along, are you, my fine gentlemen?